4, 19, 17.
1917,
It's
okay.
1987 next month, or
Wow.
in April.
Okay. Where were you born?
Keene, New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire. How did you end up in Elmira?
I came here to live with an aunt and uncle and take care of my cousin. He's younger than I am.
When was that?
That was about 1933.
And how old were you then? You were a teenager.
Yes. I don't know, I was 15 maybe.
Okay. And how long had your family been here in this area?
That's a long story.
Okay.
I'll start from the beginning.
Mhm.
My grandfather worked in the steel mill, and he traveled wherever there was work in the mills. And at one time, he came to Elmira to work in the Heights at the steel mill in the Heights. And then when that shut down, he went to Montreal. And from Montreal, he went to New Hampshire, bought a farm. And the family lived there. And then they scattered back. One daughter in Elmira, a daughter and a son in New Hampshire, and 2 sons in Ohio. So we pretty well scattered around the country. And that's how come my aunt, my father's sister, married here in Elmira and lived here. And I came to live with her and look after their son, my cousin.
How old was your cousin at the time?
He was 3 years younger than me. He was still in grammar school when I came.
Mhm.
Then we went to high school together.
Where did you go to high school?
I went to high school to EFA, where Ernie Davis is now. It was EFA then,
Okay. And what year did you graduate?
1939.
Okay. That was right before the war. Do you remember in those years of the period of buildup when the war was already going on in Europe, do you remember what the atmosphere was like?
Well, yes, I was working at Eclipse then. We were doing work for England.
What exactly, can you tell me a little bit about Eclipse, first of all? When did you start working there?
We made anti-aircraft shells for the anti-aircraft guns in England.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we went into the war, then we started making them for ourselves. Yeah, it was fun. It was hard work, but it was fun. There was a lot of people working there. At one time, there was 8,000 people working there. It's gotten down to where there's, I don't know how many's there now, 200-300 maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But the company's been sold several times.
Mm-hmm.
The Eclipse was the original company here. It was we made bicycle brakes. The company started with bicycle brakes, and then went into war work.
What year did you first start get a job there?
I started in 1941, and I worked till 1975.
Mm-hmm. What did you have to do to get a job there?
What did I have to do? Well, we went up, put an application in. My sister's here too, when we went over to Remington Rand, and she got a job over there, but they told me I was too heavy, that I couldn't work there. So I went up to Eclipse and was interviewed, and they asked me if I could knit, and I don't knit. I said I can crochet and I can sew, but I don't knit. And I wondered what I was going to be doing there if I had to knit. But it was to see if we could use our hands, because of the small pieces that we had to be able to use our hands.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to the doctor for my examination, and when I went in, I said, I'll give you a nickel if you can find anything wrong with me except that I'm overweight. And when he got done, he said, you can keep your nickel. And I worked there 23 years, so not 23, 34 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess my weight didn't make that much difference in the working. Sometimes it helped when you had to lift heavy things and work long hours on big machines. A little bit of weight helped.
Why do you think at Remington Rand, why do you think it would have been an issue?
I don't know. They didn't. I never knew. But I was glad they didn't want me because Eclipse lasted longer than the Rand.
At that time, were you looking for a job anywhere just because of the atmosphere or because of the war?
Well, I was living on the farm with my aunt and uncle and my grandparents, and it was pretty lonely there. I wanted to get out, so I went looking for a job, and with the war, the men were all going, and the women were doing the work at home, so it wasn't too hard to get a job then because they needed people. So
was that your first?
Within a week after my interview, I was working.
So that was your first job off in the
That
farm?
was my first job outside of doing housework and stuff around for the neighbors.
Where, just to backtrack a little bit, where did your aunt live?
I can't hear you.
Where did your aunt live?
Where did we live during the war?
Yeah.
Well, we lived on Row Avenue across from the hospital. And then for a while we lived on a farm up in Sullivanville.
Okay.
And after I guess I lived there about a year, and then after we moved back to Elmira.
Not to the same house on Row Avenue?
Row Avenue, yeah.
The same house?
That was our family home.
Okay.
It's still there.
Okay. In the factory, what was a typical day like? What time did you get up in the morning?
I got up at, I think it was 20 minutes to 6. And I packed my lunch and get dressed and get out on the corner a block away to get a ride. And usually we try to get a ride with somebody because the buses were always full. But if we didn't get a ride, well, then we could ride the bus. The bus went right up to the factory then. And at night coming home, the bus came up to the factory. Ordinarily they just go to 14th Street. But they came right up to the factory then. And buses were full. I can remember them being so crowded that you were sitting in somebody's lap or somebody was sitting in your lap, and there might be 3 or 4 people crowded into the seats. But it was all friendly, and everybody helped everybody else. So it was, I can remember thinking how friendly everybody was, because we were all in the same boat. We all had people in the war. I had 4 brothers, and so I was willing and able to do war work, and thought quite a lot about it when we were doing our different jobs, that we did a good job, because you would think, well, if I don't do this right, maybe my brother will get this shell or something. So we did good work. And a lot of it.
Once you arrived at work, what happened next? Did you have time cards to punch in on?
Oh yes, we had time cards to punch in the morning and on the way out.
Okay.
And we had half hour for lunch, which we didn't, most people brought their lunch. They didn't go out of the shop to eat. They brought our lunch. And they did have a cafeteria for a while. But sometimes the food was real good, and sometimes it wasn't so good. We never liked the veal stew. That we couldn't eat. But they made French fried parsnips, which nobody else ever had that I can remember. And we always ordered them when they had them on the menu. They just seemed to, well, they were different and we liked them. Yeah, people think that's funny because you don't hear French fried parsnips. In fact, parsnips are, you don't see very often anyway because they're a vegetable that is good in the spring. They leave them in the winter over the ground, leave them in the ground over the winter and then dig them up in the spring, and they're a nice springy vegetable to get something fresh and tasty.
Did you ever try to make French fried parsnips after the war?
I never make French fried them, but I used to fry them.
Okay.
Yeah, they're good.
What, can you describe the inside of the factory at Eclipse?
Well, for one thing, when we started it was very hot because the air conditioning wasn't working. And we had fans. They'd let us have a fan. Everybody had their own fan. Sometimes it would be so hot that some of the ladies would pass out. And that wasn't too nice because you didn't know who was going to be the next one to go. But gradually they got it fixed so it was better. But it was smoky. Not from people smoking, but from the machines. A lot of big machines. And it was big. It seemed like took forever to go from one end of the plant to the other. And you couldn't go certain places. But we didn't run around from one department to the other. We weren't supposed to, but sometimes we did sneak through. And when there was so many people working there, they would let us into a certain point, let the other people out first before they would let us into the plant, into our machines, because it was so many people going against each other. But everybody used to get out would rush to the clock to bring out their time card, but in a minute and a half everybody was out of there, so I never could see why the big rush. If you just wait a minute, you could walk right through and you didn't have to wait for anybody.
What time did your shift start?
7 in the morning till 3:30.
Okay.
And then there was a 3:30 to 11, and then at one time I worked on a shift that went in at 9 o'clock at night and worked till 7 in the morning, I guess. Or I liked that shift because you had your afternoon to do things. When you work 3 to 11, there's not much time to do anything.
But for the most part, which shift did you work?
Mostly I was on the 7 to 3:30, the first shift.
Do you remember your supervisor?
Some of them I do.
Okay.
Some of them fondly, some of them not so fondly.
Do you remember your first supervisor?
George Westervelt was one of the ones, and Charlie Shull was one on the automatic machines. I worked with the men on the New Britain Gridley milling machine, which was a big machine. The men didn't want the women to work on the machines. They didn't like the idea of the women working there, but they came in, any of the women, they came in anyway because so many of the men were gone. They had to have somebody run the machines. The women did a good job. Some of them worked harder than the men. And, I don't know, there was a guy named Carpenter. a lot of them, I could see their faces, but I can't put their name on the face.
Were you close to any of them, or was there sort of a hierarchy?
Well, you didn't get too friendly with your boss. At least I didn't. There was one that was a neighbor that we were friendly with. He was a good boss.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly, they were the boss.
Mm-hmm.
You did what you were told, or
Mm-hmm.
you didn't work.
Who were your coworkers?
Well, a lot of men and a lot of women. I worked across the aisle from the automatic machines, so I knew most of the men that worked there. And when we had a party or something, why, we always included them, because they didn't have women working in their department that would make a cake or bring something in. I used to take a cake in for their birthdays.
Mm-hmm.
I still have the list of the birthdays of the people that worked with us that I used to take cakes in
Mm-hmm.
for. And my one boss' birthday was a couple days ahead of mine, so we used to celebrate our birthdays together.
Mm-hmm.
Until after the war, and then things kind of closed down. We didn't have as much freedom as we did during the war.
Mm-hmm.
We couldn't bring things in. We didn't have the freedom to meet with other people.
Why do you think there was a difference?
Well, I think maybe because during the war the government was paying for everything. You know, you were a little bit slack with what you did, and sometimes the material wouldn't come in, the steel wouldn't come in, and they still let us come in, but we cleaned the machines, we painted machines, we cleaned, we did all kinds of things to keep busy,
Mm-hmm.
but we still went into work and got paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't do that after the war, because the company was paying your wage then.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I guess during the war the company paid too, but it was a government contract, so they knew they were going to get their money.
Mm-hmm.
That made a little bit of difference. It wasn't quite as much fun after the war ended.
Were there a lot fewer people working there?
Oh yeah.
Were you afraid of losing your job?
No, because we could go in if we were laid off, we'd go in every, I don't know, 6 months or a year and sign the papers to keep our seniority up. And if they had a job come up and you were the top one on the list, you could take that job, or if it was something you hadn't done or didn't want to do, then you could put your name on the end of the list again and wait till you're called again.
Mm-hmm.
One time I was in New Hampshire to where my parents lived, and my name was called, and I came from New Hampshire to sign my papers to hold my rights.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a job that I hadn't done, so I didn't take it, and I waited until something came up that I could do. Well, that was nice, because we knew that we had a job when the right time came.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were laid off after the war, we could collect unemployment, but they made it so miserable for us that I never did collect all I was eligible for, because you had to go in and sign, and we had to look for a job. You had to take a paper and get it signed that said that you were looking for a job, because you had to be ready, willing, and able to work in order to get your check.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a little bit unpleasant, but I did get all I was entitled to. Then I went back to work after the after the war, then they started making carburetors. And put a lot of us back to work.
Mhm. Can you describe what your jobs were when you were during the wartime? What were your jobs?
Well, on the big machines, we were making the outside casing for the anti-aircraft shell, and that was a big automatic machine. That thing went around, and there were 6 stations, and when that station came around, you put a piece in, and it went to the next one, and you were putting something in, taking something out all the time.
Mhm. Was it an assembly line?
No, on a machine.
Okay.
I didn't like working on an assembly line. I did for a while, but I'd rather work on a machine by myself.
Mhm.
Not.
And you were the only one running this big machine?
Oh, there was a lot of them, a lot of the machines. I wasn't the only one. But, yeah, it was my responsibility to run that machine.
Mhm.
Nobody worked on that machine with me.
Mhm.
But there were a lot of machines.
Did you have to start up the machine as well? Or was it always running?
Oh, no, you started it.
How did you do that?
Push the button.
You push the button? Okay.
Push the button, put the work in, and you had a handle here that you had to push over to lock the work in. And then it would automatically turn, and you'd take a piece out, put it on the bench, and then put another piece in.
Mhm.
Just continually moving your hands.
Mhm. What were the pieces that you put in sheets of metal?
No, they were round pieces, shaped like a cup, sort of.
Okay.
Shove them into the.
And had someone put that piece together to that point somewhere else in the building?
That was the starting of the work, the piece.
Okay.
That was one piece.
Okay. And where did they go when you were done with them?
To another operation, and then to be washed, and then to assembly, and there was a lot of work to each piece.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it.
It kept you busy.
Mm-hmm.
If you were lucky, you could make your rate. Took a while to get so you could move fast enough and handle the work so that you could do as many as you're supposed to an hour.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember your first day of work? It must have seemed overwhelming.
What did I do the first day? Oh, I started in the old plant before the new plant was finished, and it was like a long room with windows on the side and over the top, and it was hot in the summer and leaked in the winter. I don't remember what I did what first work that I did. I'll have to think about that. Yeah. But I did different things.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't remember what the first thing was.
So did you spend most of your time working on that machine that you were describing to me?
No, you went from one to another wherever there was work.
Mm-hmm.
I was lucky I had one machine for almost a year that I worked exclusively on that machine.
Mm-hmm.
But, well, when we were busy during the war, why, we pretty much had the same job all the time, as long as we were doing the shells.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, when we went into other work, why, wherever you were needed, you worked.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you'd have a job for a few months, and then maybe that would run out and you'd do something else.
Mhm.
But it was mostly same thing.
Mhm.
Get so you could do it in your sleep.
Were there a lot of injuries?
uh, there were some, yes. I still have a fingernail that won't grow only so far because I got it in the punch press.
Mm.
Press came down and took the end of my finger off.
Mm.
But yeah, and we had to wear caps, put our hair under a cap, and this one girl didn't have her cap on and she got her hair caught in the machine, pulled a big chunk of her hair out.
Mm.
And there were some bad accidents, but mostly we were pretty careful, and we wore safety glasses and safety tip shoes, and try not to have anything that would get caught in the machine, like a ribbon or something on your clothes. They were pretty strict about that, and trying to see how long they could go without an accident.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Didn't you get rewarded? If you went for long periods of time without accidents, did they reward the workers?
I don't know that they did. Except they might be in our newspaper that a certain department didn't have any accidents for a certain length of time,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I don't remember getting any personal award for anything.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to wear specific clothes?
No, we could wear. I always wore an apron, or put your apron or something in. When I was working where there was oil, I wore an oilskin apron,
Mm-hmm.
oilcloth, so I wouldn't be soaked through with oil. I was so short that I used to have to wear an apron up over my shoulder because reaching into the machine I'd get all the oil.
Mm-hmm. So you had your street clothes on under
Mm-hmm.
the apron. Was the apron yours, or did it belong to the
Yeah,
factory?
it was mine.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you wear pants or dress?
Could either, whatever you wanted to. Mostly I wore dress. Toward the last that I worked, I found work suits. They used to have the pants and the jackets,
Mm-hmm.
and I liked those.
Mm-hmm.
But mostly dresses.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember some of the women that you worked with? Did you have any close friends that you worked with?
Oh yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes. I have some. Two of them that I know of now are in. One is in a home, and the other is mentally disabled. But once in a while you see somebody that you used to work with. But you would think with all the people that work there that you'd see a lot of them, but you don't.
Mm-hmm.
First, they came from Pennsylvania for miles around to work. And after that, you didn't see them.
After your shift ended, did you ever hang out with the other people?
I used to go with the men.
Mm-hmm.
I probably should say this. They bowled on the bowling team.
Okay.
And it was my job to bring in the drinks. But we did it quite easily. We took a pop bottle and that was Coke bottles. We had glass bottles then. Didn't have tin cans. And dump the Coke out and fill it up with your choice and put a little Coke in the top. Put the top on. I carried them in my pocket. But that was, things were easygoing. That would be midnight. They'd be going to bowl because it was the second shift.
Mhm.
So,
Where did they bowl?
Ross Ice
Okay.
on Washington Avenue. It's still there.
Uh-huh. Was it a bowling league through the Eclipse?
Yes, it was a league through the Eclipse League. Then we used to go to the baseball games, Dunn Field, sit in the right side bleachers. You know, a whole gang of them would go.
Mhm.
That was fun to all be there together.
Mhm.
Of course, they had baseball leagues and bowling leagues before the women went there to work. And then I guess the women had their own leagues. I never bowled or played ball on a league,
Mhm.
but they had them. It was fun.
In the factory during the war years, why were there men still there? Why were there men that didn't go off to the war?
Well, some of them were too old, and some of them had medical reasons, but most of the able-bodied men left.
Mhm.
We had going away parties for them down at the Rathbun Hotel for a lot of them when they left.
What was the proportion of women to men in the war years at the factory?
I don't know. I think it was probably about even.
About even? Okay.
I don't know. Because they had a lot of men there that didn't go. I don't know why.
Mhm.
Whether it was their age or medical reasons or why they didn't go.
Mhm.
Most of the younger ones
Mhm.
went.
Do you remember the men, the attitude of the men who were there? Were they receptive to working with women?
A lot of them didn't like it. I know one man quit because he wasn't going to work with women.
Mm-hmm.
And one older man who was a neighbor, before I went to work, he was very much against the women going to work. Well, he got laid off, and I got the job that he had when I went into work.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't sit too well with him, but he didn't want to work with women.
Mm-hmm.
They thought we couldn't do it, but we proved that we could.
Mm-hmm.
We worked on all of the different machines. In the big New Britain Gridleys and drill machines and milling machines and lathes. I worked for a long time on a hard-inch lathe,
Mm-hmm.
which was about the best lathe you can get. They still make hard-inch lathes in Elmira,
Mm-hmm.
Elmira Heights. It was a good machine.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when we first started after the war that the jobs were brought in from South Bend
Mm-hmm.
in the machines. They came all crated up, and when we got a new part to do, we'd have to go and find the machine and find the parts and bring them to the department and set them up and get them going. That was interesting to do.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes took a long time to find all the parts to a machine, get it going.
Mm-hmm. It's like a puzzle.
Yeah, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In the work area, did the men ever say or do anything to the women to make them feel like they didn't belong there?
I don't remember that. Well, I know in one department that I went in to work, I was the only girl in there, or the first one. I guess they wanted to see if we could do the work, and the men resented it. Some of them, one man was very nice and helped me, and some of the others were very sarcastic and not pleasant to be around.
Mhm.
But it didn't do them any good because we stayed anyway.
Mhm.
But they found out that the women could do some of the jobs that the men didn't want to do.
Mhm.
And we could do it faster and better.
Mhm.
Especially the young men, just the young ones just starting. Didn't want a hard job.
By hard job, do you mean things that you...
It had to do a lot of work, do a lot of parts,
Mhm.
and heavy work.
Mhm.
We had some pretty rugged women there that could do any of the jobs and did it well, made the rates.
What were the rates?
They had somebody come down with a timer, and he'd time us to see how long it took us to do certain jobs,
Mhm.
and then they'd figure out how many we should do in an hour, and that would be our rate.
Mhm.
And then if we could do more than that, then we got paid for the extra. So we always wanted to be careful what kind of a rate we put on a job, because we wanted to be able to make the rate and a little over.
Mhm. How often were you timed?
Well, just once if it was a good rate. If you had a job that you were doing 2 or 3 times more than what your rate was, well, they knew that was off, then they might come down and time you and raise the rates.
Mhm.
Well, they didn't say anything if we made time and a half, but over that, why, it was apt to be changed.
Mhm.
And they, I think, more or less tried to get as much as they needed for assembly for that day. If they needed 1,200 parts on assembly, why, they wanted you to get that many out for them,
Mhm.
so they could keep going.
1,200 parts in a day.
The rate on my job was 600 an hour, and I could do 800 an hour.
Mm.
That was a lot of moving.
Yeah.
But you after a while you do it automatically. I couldn't hear. It was very, very noisy, but we learned to read lips.
Mhm.
So somebody way over in the other department you could talk to by reading lips.
Mhm.
That was fun. You didn't get the wrong signal.
Yeah, right.
But most of the time it was a pretty agreeable place to work. Once in a while there was some kind of a disagreement, but it was straightened out,
Mhm.
fixed up so that things went smoothly. It doesn't seem that during the war it should be a fun time, but it was, because people were, I think, trying to look out for one another, and they didn't know whether the next day they might be called to go to war, so they were having fun while they could. And you had to work, so you had fun while you worked, because you didn't have too much time when you weren't working. One time I worked 6 weeks without a day off, and then I worked 5 weeks without a day off, and you didn't get too many days off. We worked Sundays and all right through when it was very busy, when they needed the shells.
Mhm. Did you ever complain?
Did I ever complain? Yeah, there was a few times when I didn't think things were fair, and I complained to the boss.
Mhm.
Sometimes they changed them, and most of the time they didn't.
Mhm. But they listened?
Oh, they'd listen, yeah. But boss was the boss. Even if he was wrong. But I worked on the same line for a long time, and I knew a lot of the jobs, and more or less knew if they were right or wrong. If they were wrong, you try to get them fixed, because if you don't do your part right, the next guy that has to assemble it can't do his job.
Right.
Things don't go together. So you all have to work together to make it come out right in the end.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever remember your machine?
My machine?
Do you remember it breaking down?
Well, one time the belts broke. I had to have new belts put in.
Did you have to install them?
I didn't have to do them, no.
Mm-hmm.
No, I had guys that did the machine, worked on the machines. I could set my own machine and gauge the work to know if it was right or wrong.
Mm-hmm. What did you do while the machine was being repaired?
Well, sometimes you got another job, or else you just waited.
Mm-hmm. How long did it take them to fix a belt?
Oh, I don't know. A couple hours, maybe longer, depending on how much work there was.
Mm-hmm.
But they had repairmen all the time that took care of the machines.
Mm-hmm.
I do that old machine pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Was there a desirable job at the Eclipse? Was there something that everybody wanted to do?
Well, I don't know if there was something everybody wanted to do, but there were jobs that nobody wanted to do.
Like what? What were the worst ones?
Well, one of the first ones I had, the work had graphite on it. So you were black all the time, and it was hard to get off. We used to have a hand lotion that we put on our hands to get the graphite out. But it would get in your nails, and it was kind of a messy job. But it was a job that nobody wanted because it was hard to keep up, to do the work fast enough to keep the rest of the line going. And so I took it on, and I learned to do it so that I could keep the others going.
Mm-hmm.
But I wore gloves. You had to be careful with that too, because you couldn't get any thread or anything in the word.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some jobs like that some people could do that nobody else seemed to be able to do. But I think it's because you worked at it so long, you learned all the little tricks about how to do it fast and have the work right.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't only doing the work fast, but it had to be right. Had to gauge right, or it wasn't any good. Couldn't get a screw in sideways and have it work. Everything had to work right.
How did you feel about the war?
How do I feel about the war?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we used to worry. We'd watch the papers and listen to the news, and of course I was quite interested because I had 4 brothers in different areas.
Mm-hmm. Where were your brothers?
Well, one went in North Africa and up through Italy, and one went to Germany, and one that was in the Marines was in the islands in Guadalcanal, down that area, and then my youngest brother was in the Navy. But he went into it late, so he didn't get into any combat duty, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 4 of them went and 4 of them came home. So you thought about what you were doing. You know, you didn't try to slip something by that wasn't right, because then you'd think, well, what if they got it? And I remember my one brother saying that sometimes the ammunition didn't work, and that was bad for them. So, but we watched it and listened, and it was just like when they won a battle, it was just like our team, like a football team. Our team won. If the things were down, they lost. It was kind of an up and down thing. And never quite sure where they were, because they couldn't tell us where they were.
Mm-hmm. Did they write to you?
Oh yes, they wrote, and my one brother and I had a signal when before he went overseas. He said, I'll write you and ask you for money. That means I'm getting ready to go overseas. And he did. He was in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Sent me a telegram. And I sent him money. I knew he was going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
And he did. He went to England. He went in on not the first wave, but the fifth wave in the beaches.
Mm-hmm.
He was lucky. He came home.
Mm-hmm.
But give you a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, I was in Elmira then, and they were living in New Hampshire. And when my one brother left, came down the stairs, two at a time, and he broke one of the treads on the steps. Hit it so hard. And somebody had told my mother, don't change anything till they come back. That board was broken in that step until my brother came home. And she never got rid of any of their letters till when she got older and she knew she was going. Because we can't find any of the boys' letters. I think that she destroyed them before she died. I always remember that broken step. Oh, excuse me.
Sure.
Probably Jimmy.
We're recording.
Where's that from?
It's 1 hour. 1 hour. Do you remember during the war years when you were working so hard, do you remember what you did on your day off?
Probably washing and cleaning and shopping. And I had a garden. I used to make pickles and jams and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Probably mostly just trying to catch up with the work that she didn't get done during the week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you participate in any of the war relief activities around Elmira?
No,
Like the Red Cross or the WADC?
no, we didn't have much time after work. You were too tired to do too much. I didn't do any of that until later.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember the day of victory in Europe when Germany surrendered? Do you remember what it was like in the factory that day? Or even when Japan surrendered later?
I don't remember in the factory that day, but I remember at home, everybody got in their car and went downtown and raced up and down the street and tooted the horns and made all kinds of noise. And my sister and I and my uncle and the neighbors all got in the car and went downtown. Rode around with the rest of the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember Pearl Harbor, that was on a Sunday, and I was working, and I didn't know until I got home what had happened.
Mm-hmm. What did you think?
Well, we were pretty devastated. We didn't, know what was going to happen after that.
Mm-hmm. So you were...
And I remember in 1939 when Hitler invaded Poland, we had been to New York to the World's Fair, and we came back up through Connecticut on our way to New Hampshire, and we stopped to eat in the morning And that's when we heard that Hitler invaded Poland, up someplace in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
Some things very clear and others not so clear.
How quickly after the war ended did things go back to normal in Elmira?
Oh, I think I was out of work 9 months. By the time the war ended, and when they let us go, and then they started up the new jobs, and we went back to work. So I went to New Hampshire at that time, and I stayed until my brothers came home.
Mm-hmm. What was it like when your brothers came home?
Wow, it was one. I saw a truck stop outside the road, and somebody got out, and I didn't pay much attention until knocking on the door, and it was my brother Herb. He had gotten as far as Chicago and couldn't get a train or a bus, so he started hitchhiking, and he hitchhiked home and got a ride on a truck, and got home. And Bill, he was, I don't know if I was home then or not. He was in town, and he was walking down the street when some of his sisters saw him coming. And my oldest brother, I guess I wasn't home. I wasn't home when he came home, but he had married a girl down south, and he came home and got my mother, and he went down south to get his wife. It was a big day. And my mother was helping take care of her cousin who was ill, and so she wasn't home when Herb got home, and he took the car and went up to get her, and her cousin started to cry, and my mother said, "What are you crying now for? He's home." So, yeah, they were all lucky to come back.
What year did you finally leave the Eclipse?
What year? 1975.
Okay. How was the job different in the years afterwards? Did you enjoy working there?
It wasn't as much fun after the war. You know, things were tighter, more strict. You couldn't do things that didn't matter before. You couldn't do now.
Mm-hmm.
You had to pretty much stick to your machine and put out the work.
Mm-hmm.
I quit. Well, at that time, they gave us the option. If we had 30 years service and were 55 years old, we could retire, because that's when they were changing over. So a lot of us retired then. And my daughter wanted me to stay home to take care of my oldest grandchild when their second one was born.
Mm-hmm.
So I retired before the second one was born to take care of the first one.
Afterwards, I've heard in the news in the past few years a lot of things are going on with the pension plan for retired employees at Eclipse. Were you involved in that at all?
In what?
The pension, the retirement?
Oh, the pension. Oh, it wasn't so much a pension as it was our insurance.
You were saying
sometimes I don't. They changed it. It was supposed to be Thursday. It was supposed to be the 12th. Anyway, they changed it to Thursday the 8th. No, I got it written down Thursday the 18th, and Thursday is the 19th, and Wednesday is the 18th. So I didn't know if I was supposed to go on Wednesday or Thursday, so I had to call them. So it's the 18th at 3 o'clock. So maybe I can see better.
the pension or the retirement, you were talking about the medical benefits?
It was the medical benefits that they took away from us.
They did take them away?
Yeah, but
Okay.
we got them back.
Okay.
The union went to bat for us, and we have received our benefits. But we're still in negotiation for 1 year of benefits that they didn't give us. Money that we paid out
Mhm.
when they took that away from us. We got 1 year back, but now they're negotiating the second year.
How many
After the first year.
how many people are involved in this?
Oh, there's something like 800 or so.
Wow.
So there's a lot of retirees.
Right.
Well, a lot of us